Hi everyone, welcome to another SAWSA lecture. We are really happy to have you here. Today we have James Shen from People's Architecture Office coming to speak to us about our sensitivity in the design. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us and taking part in our event. So without further ado, I'll pass on to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to share some of our work, some of our thinking with you. So to start off with, I thought, well, as a topic, I thought we could think of some of this work as our way of dealing with uncertainty. That I think design has a strong role in that, and certainly from this last year or so, this is a condition that is particularly intense. But just to give a bit of background first, I'm originally from Los Angeles. I grew up in the U.S., but I spent about 10 years in China. I'm now back in the U.S. But continuing with the practice. But the office itself was founded in Beijing, and the location of our office, I think, is pretty important for our practice. We are right in the center of the city. You can see the Forbidden City is right here. This is Tiananmen Square, and we're in this area here called Dashilar. And also, I thought I'd give you kind of a sense of the environment that we work in. This is it's really a mostly residential neighborhood with some of these smaller kind of commercial streets. Really, these are more like alleyways. We call them hutongs, and they're very famous in China. And so, really, this environment is much more of a human scale than you would find in many parts of China, mostly because it's older, right? And our office is in one of these old courtyard houses that's been converted into our studio. And here you see we're very much a hands-on kind of practice. We have a little shop. We make things in the courtyard. We try things out, and we try to do things in full scale when we can. And as you can see in our name, we really try to focus on design that is connected to people and communities. So that we try our best to take some of our designs out, take them for a spin, interact with the people around us, with the environment. And we'll be also just kind of hacking things together, prototyping. These were bikes that we actually borrowed from some neighbors. So our office, we really try to connect with people. We also invite the community in for events and parties, ways of involving the people around us, having them, exposing them to our work as well, movie nights and all kinds of things. And it's also a place where you can be a little bit more open to, well, I guess, yeah, you can feel comfortable about being casual. There's a certain casualness to this, and there's also a lot of informality in this area in terms of how people interact with their environment in making things, and it's really a great, very lively, intimate place. So I'm going to start with showing some work where we, in a similar way, we are observing the environment around us, and we're acting on it, and hopefully connecting with people. And definitely living in China, you're surrounded by all kinds of really interesting activities. Different. You're always confronted with different ways that people are occupying space, using their environment. And You know, these really inspire ideas for us, right? You think of space a certain way, it's designed for certain things, for certain functions, but you also see people using space in ways that you didn't expect. So, for example, in this image, you can see this is just a kind of a pretty regular parking lot, but then you have this strange circular area that's slightly sunken, and these people have turned it into street furniture, a kind of play area. You know, kids probably would understand better that, with the circular area, that this is a place that you should not get out of, but they can sort of play inside, and grandparents can watch them. So yeah, it's this sort of conversion of seeing space in different ways, right? To imagine different uses, and a space that organizes activity in ways that you don't expect. So an example of how we've used this, I mean, this is a very direct example. I mean, literally from that picture, we thought of, oh, we can add these kind of ring type spaces for people to use in exactly the same way. This is called our social network factory. It's an art, I guess you'd say an art installation. Um, it's also meant to get people to interact with the environment, with each other, and also in ways that well, we hope that people will just sort of explore and try to discover how this could be used, how they can interact with it. And this is in a city called Shenzhen, next to a museum called Design Society, which was actually opened together with the V&A. You see, we have all kinds of events here. This was actually after COVID. Soon after, life sort of ended up being more normal. And so I think also with COVID, you see people using space in ways that I think weren't as common, at least in the U.S. Maybe in denser areas you would find a lot of people using public space, being outdoors a lot. In China, this actually is more common. Another thing is also covering outdoor areas that usually are used for very specific uses, like streets and alleyways. And here you have this tent that's covering this area for the street for dining. In China, you have these expandable tents. They're like these accordion-like structures that people will use in a similar way, expanding out and occupying space for gatherings. And here you see this is for dining, and this is actually done informally. So to do this in the U.S., you probably have to get all kinds of permissions and things like that. In China, oftentimes this is something that's sort of the ability to do this is sort of implicit. It's not, or it's implied. It's not. It exists within a sort of a gray area, because these are actually streets. So during the day, you have cars and bikes going through them, but at night, when there's less traffic, people just expand out. And if no one says you can't do it, then they just sort of do it. A while back, we were invited to Preston. This is in the UK, by a fantastic organization called In Certain Places out of the University of Lancashire. And they asked us to come up with a way of connecting the university with the center of town, and to do it in a way where we would activate the center. And so that we came up with these canopies. The ones that we saw in China really just took those and put bicycle wheels on them, and then built a bunch of them and had people cycle these from the university to the city center and had all kinds of activities. And then this project was then replicated in a lot of other places. This is in Leuven in Belgium, used in a similar way. We had volunteers cycling them from one place to another, and this whole kind of process was sort of like a parade. You know, the moving of these structures it was also an event, and since then we've had this in many places. Actually, this doesn't include a lot of the more recent uses of the people's canopy. But yeah, it's been lots of different cities, always working with the government and always providing this sort of pop-up venue to allow people to hold events and to be involved with the actual organization of these spaces. So actually, in each instance, people have used these in different ways. They've been lined up in a very long sort of like an arcade type of situation, or they've been arranged, grouped together so that you have kind of a large, more open event space, or they've been separated into different parts of the city, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. So that was one thing that was quite exciting for us, is that this design allowed for this kind of flexibility. Another project here also it draws from these observations of seeing a kind of a different sort of vernacular, I would say, in the city. And so you'll often see these kind of ventilation pipes, right, that are outside of buildings. And actually, what you're able to understand from this is that I realized that you have programmed in spaces that were not originally meant to be there, right? That's why you have these pipes that are not incorporated into the building. So, for example, a restaurant that's in a basement, or a space that has no windows, and they then have to have these sprawling ventilation pipes. This project also draws from seeing how people will also just move furniture out into the street and just they create their own street furniture, public furniture. People just like to hang out there because you don't really have much public space oftentimes, so then the street becomes that space. And so this project called Tubular Baitasi. Baitasi is the name of this area. It's also a historic area. And we also use the name as part of this project. So here, if you can read Chinese, you'd be able to see that these are 3 characters that spell out Baitasi. We use ventilation tubes for this. You can see parts of these can be used as street furniture. We don't say that this is furniture; that people just understand that it is. And also parts of these are these kind of periscope type structures that allow people to look into the second story of this building, which is this kind of a cultural center, and they hold events. Actually, the first event here was this was from the AA. It was a kind of like a studio event, bring designers here, and so you'd be able to, people on the street that would probably have no idea what architecture is or really understand it, could have a peek at what's going on inside. And also, we also have other periscopes that then aim at different parts of this area, where you would see important landmarks, important buildings, important historic buildings in this area. So it's a way to get people to familiarize themselves if they're new visitors to this location. And so drawing in scale, and along the same theme of this kind of you know incorporating materials and things that we see into our projects to activate space. This uses scaffolding to build this sort of temporary event space. We have these inflatables that become this covering for an area where you can have you should show movies and have performances. And also lots of areas where people can actually walk up and through the space. It's a sizable project that turns this space into an event space. And finally, the last project I'll show in this section is what we call the people station. And so this project you can see is actually in a parking lot. But it's not a temporary building. In fact, originally they weren't sure if it could be a permanent building or not. They didn't really have the permissions, and there wasn't really a good process to go about getting this approved because it was sort of not a very standard situation. This is actually also a historic area, and this was meant to be a building that would serve as kind of the entryway into this district, and again to activate this space. This is a cultural center, and the first event here was a retrospective of our work. So there's a gallery space inside. We also integrated some of our earlier projects that had to do with so these vehicles that also could dock into the structure, then also ride out to bring some of the activity to the public. We also incorporated the people's canopy into this project. You can see it can expand out to serve as this public space, and then you can also ride it to other locations and then also have events elsewhere. Yeah, and so the next section I'd like to talk about sort of this tension between a collective society and also your own individual sort of your individual independence. And I think this is something that it's an issue where practicing in China gives us an interesting perspective, right, as opposed to growing up in the U.S. And I think an important aspect of this, there's you can think of these things, these issues, the collective versus the individual, as being sort of contrasting, conflicting ideas. But if you bring in the notion of history, memory, and place, then I think there's a way where we can start to understand how this can be connected, especially through architecture. So these next series of projects are what we call plugins. This is our Courier house plugin, the sort of the first instance of our use of this approach. So the context is the same neighborhood where our office is in, and it's really a place where you have it has a lot of history, and it's very lively, but it's also quite run down. It has there's sort of sunlight conditions here, and the government actually wasn't sure what to do with this area. They actually wanted to try something other than sort of removing everyone and tearing everything down and rebuilding it anew. They were looking for alternatives, and so what we suggested was to build a house inside a house. So literally within this old structure, to not tear it down, to not touch it, to not even renovate it if you don't need to. And then just to build an independent structure inside of it, right? So we really left the existing situation as it was. but then still improving it drastically. And so this kind of approach, I think today with COVID, we've seen right kind of reimagining of how you could use space, and the idea of building a structure inside a structure actually is not so strange. And in this area in Dashalar, you have also lots of instances of this. This is this old bank building that was then sort of converted into a residential building. I think in an informal way, in an ad hoc way. And you see all these little structures on the ground here are all additions that people just built into this bank atrium. And so this is an example of, this is one of the earliest examples of the plugins. You can see inside the doorway here, right, that you can see our structure that we inserted. And then on the outside is the original structure. Here's another example of how things looked before, and then with our plugins inside. And this neighborhood was really a pilot project with the city to see how we could use a different way of upgrading this area. And you can see here with all the dark red sites, that these are places that are vacant. So this area, because the conditions continue to degrade, people just started moving out, and you have actually a lot of spaces here that are. I mean, this is a very desirable location. I mean, the conditions aren't good, but the proximity to things is fantastic. And you have such a dearth of housing in all of China. It was really bizarre to see that we had all these kind of vacant spaces here, right? And actually, it's difficult to upgrade this place in your typical way without just tearing everything down and rebuilding, because you have all the infrastructure. You know, you need toilets, and you've got to add sewers and heating, cooling, all these kinds of things. So really, what we wanted to do was to see how you could not be so disruptive, keep the people there, and also improve conditions so that you can also bring in people to this neighborhood, whether or not they're people that were from here originally, or they could be new people, you know, younger people. Actually, in this area, most of the people that live here are elderly. You know, so this approach we used in many locations in this site. So it's really not a one-off. It's designed as a system. And these are all these different floor plans of these projects. But because we're able to insert these without creating such drastic disruptions, it's actually possible, very possible, for residents to stay here and actually be involved. Now, this is where the memory of a place comes into play, is that actually a lot of residents have gone through really painful experiences, especially with the government, with being you know, pushed out of areas and not be able to come back, and really left with not you know, very few choices as to how they can go on with their lives. But with our process, we were able to work with a lot of residents who were interested in our approach. So this is actually Mrs. Dong, and you can see this is her house before, really small, about 20 square meters in space, and then this is afterwards. It was really cold for her in the winter, and really hot in the summer. She didn't have her own private shower, and you know, we were able to improve her living conditions quite a lot. And this is our office. We also renovated using this approach. And then we also took these to other places, other cities, and other areas of cities where you have also poor conditions. This is in Shenzhen, where the building itself is actually, I mean, it's not possible to live in there. It doesn't even have a roof, but these buildings weren't torn down because of certain issues with property rights, and so they're just kind of left there, sitting there with sitting there unused. And so we proposed that we propose using the system to upgrade this. So this was particularly challenging for this one because it's such a small space. And in this case, it's different from our earlier plugins because this one was really exposed to the outside, so it actually increases the requirements for the structure. But you can see this is something we can build really quickly. You know, for example, Mrs. Dong, you saw that her furniture was moved out into the courtyard. She was able to do that the same day as we did the construction, as we started the construction and ended, and then she was able to move it back. So she didn't have to worry that she wouldn't be able to, she'd be kicked out for months and then not be able to come back. And yeah, and so in this instance, you can see that it's actually a structure that's pretty sensitive. You couldn't do anything that would really cause too much vibration or anything like that. You can climb on top of it, you can create some scaffolding. But we were able to do this in a way that's very, very smooth and non-destructive. This is another one where, I mean, practically the building's not almost non-existent, the original one. But yeah, this is the plugins are made out of a kind of a prefabricated panel that we developed. It's not something that is available on the market, and it has these locks that allow you to basically build this very quickly with one tool and with very, very little skill. But a part of these projects was also the infrastructure that comes with it, right? So we also integrated septic systems as a septic tank. We went in and installed this and figured it out. Also composting toilets, so that people could be more comfortable. I mean, there are actually literally people that would die from the cold, from very old people that go out and they have to use these public toilets, which they do have, but you would have a few along one street, and from just going out there in the cold, people can actually get harmed. So yeah, we were able to provide this in the home itself. This is a fully independent plug-in house. We started doing this when residents came to us asking for this. So this then became something that was outside of a project that we worked with the government. It again was in this sort of gray area because a lot of these would replace sort of these informally built buildings that residents had built. So this was the first time we tried this out, and I'll show a video with Mrs. Fan talking about this project.
我从小在这个院子长大的，从小学1年级开始吧，一直到高中，一直生活在这个大院里面，对这个院子有很多特别美好的回忆。高2的时候吧，我父母在辅食路那边又买了一套楼房。我不太喜欢住楼房，首先那一道门就感觉把你们两家就给隔阂出来了。但是这个平房吧就不一样，那么窄的一胡同，每天大家都是抬头不见低头见的，点一下头，哈个腰，微笑一下，很小的动作，大家就心领神会。妈妈不太想让我再回这边来住，他们觉得你们俩都成家了也应该自己买一套房子。但是我是觉得我有这么一套房子是我自己的，我完完全全可以重新打造一下，变成一个我自己喜欢的小窝。周围的邻居也过来参观，盖的过程中大家都可能会比较好奇吧， 因为之前都是那种砌砖式的，像这个是那种内合板子，它是一个整体搭建过来的。盖完了以后，他们会觉得你这小房子弄得挺新颖的，很不错。如果设计成这样，没有人不愿意回来了。我跟我母亲多少都会有叫什么密闭忧郁症啊，就是我们不能在一个特别封闭的空间里待着。之前的房子非常的暗，那个时候进到这个屋子，你几乎分不清楚是白天还是晚上，没有采光。现在就是完全不一样，敞亮度、明亮度各个方面就会觉得很舒服。我很喜欢阳光普照在身上的那种感觉，就会很温暖。我觉得堆肥马桶呢，是既解决了让自己在屋里可以方便，又不会破坏环境，所以我觉得国外做的非常好，应该在国内进行推广。空间有限嘛，有一个小的露台，夏天你可以晒晒被子，可以布置成一小花园，头顶就是蓝天，环境又好又惬意。现在写字楼啊都是在城里嘛，买一套房子不是说挺贵，真的很贵。改造这个平房，总的来说它是比买房子要压力小很多很多。之前每天工作往返都要4个小时，但是现在往返的路程就1个小时，这样我每天可以节省很多时间，不用花在路上。我可能比人早走一步，更快的接受了一下这种新鲜的事物。但是我觉得，就是因为会有人首先接受新事物，大家应该都会更向往这种生活，也希望自己的居住条件变得更好。
Yeah, so this is Mrs. Fan with us working on this design, figuring out what would be right for them. And really, this was, the plugins are a fraction of the cost of any kind of option that people would have. So it really was it was a way that they could afford to upgrade a home here. Actually, they had left this neighborhood when she was young, and so she's one of these people that are. It's not so common to find people that are her age, that are younger, that want to actually move back into a neighborhood where it's just not, oftentimes not so convenient in terms of the standard of living. But one of the aspects of this project was that we had to kind of figure out, the form of this. And really the form of it wasn't about how it looked, but really about how much space we could provide her without other people thinking that's a problem. Typically, you would go through the city and they would have guidelines and such that would dictate what you could do. But in this case, this structure is actually technically not legal. I mean, it's not. The authorities would come by and they did see this and they didn't say anything, but they also can't say it's okay, right? But really, the concerns that they had were with their neighbors. So that's what dictated the shape, was talking to the neighbors and them telling us, okay, please don't block my window here and block my light there, and if they were okay with it, then everything was fine. Now it turned out that when we built this, one of the neighbors, the neighbor over here, came out and she's like, "Hey, what's going on? You're blocking my light here. You're blocking my view here. I'm not I'm not okay with this." And then we said, "Well, didn't you talk to your neighbors? I mean, we just did this according to what you told us." He's like, "Actually, well, with this neighbor, they hadn't spoken to them in decades. It's a neighbor that they really didn't have a good relationship with, and so yeah, they didn't for this project, they didn't talk to them about it." And so one night they actually met up with that neighbor, after many years of not speaking to them, and then worked things out. And so this project actually ended up also repairing the relationship. And then on our part, one interesting thing about this material that we're using, because they come in these panels, we're actually able to slice off that corner up here, and then also help resolve this problem. Right? And yeah, you can see it as this corner right here. And actually, probably, I would say that it improved the improved the design, and also has a good reason to it. And so moving forward, you can see in this location where we've been in these areas where we're building all these plugins, that people actually live in a very in really a strong state of uncertainty. A lot of times people actually don't know if they could continue to live there. There might be a lot of pressure from development to push them out, to whether or not it's commercial or otherwise. And also their situations are unstable in terms of just their income. These are people that are definitely lower income. And it was part of the reason why we're interested in working in these locations for these people, is because oftentimes architects aren't able to engage with this part of the population. And also we were confronted with the situation in cities where the disparities are really drastic, right? I mean, you can clearly delineate how society is segregated, right, in terms of income and class and so forth. And this is something that is spatial, and also I think from 2020, especially from the perspective of the U.S. And COVID and Black Lives Matter and lots of things that have been happening. There's also more greater agency in terms of dealing with this kind of spatial segregation. I think this is something that's directly related to architecture and urbanism. You can see here, this is the South Side of Chicago. We have these names, right? The South Side or the other side of the tracks. It's ingrained in our in our language. This idea that different people are segregated into different areas, and these places, these people are not accepted on equal terms. So our plugins, we really try to use this to deal with this issue. And a few years ago, we decided to also bring this plugin, this approach to the U.S. And in the U.S., there's this idea of encouraging people to build houses in their backyards, and this is something that is being promoted on a policy level. These are called accessory dwelling units, and I think actually in the UK they've been starting to talk about this as well. That is that in that a lot of American cities are not dense, not very dense at all, very suburban. The lots are very large, and oftentimes cities actually intentionally discriminate against people by requiring that lot sizes have to be a minimum of a certain amount, right? So their lot has to be a certain size. It can't be below that size, right? And also on that lot, you can't build too much. You can't use much of that lot, right? So inevitably, you ensure that people live a certain distance from each other, and also you ensure that you can't build more, right? That you prevent more people from moving into these areas. And usually the areas that are more expensive are areas that are more desirable, closer to social services and so on, amenities. So in order to connect with this issue, we started doing some demonstrations of our plugin house. So I had a chance to do this at Harvard University. This is at Harvard Yard. We brought these plugin panels here, shipped them over, and then invited students to participate in building this. Again, this is something that was done just in a day. And these students, even though they're architecture students, a lot of them had never built anything before. So that experience is not necessary. But I think the experience of doing this was something that they enjoyed very much. And then we had a kind of an exhibition to talk about this approach, and had all kinds of events. So we also use this to activate this place. Had all kinds of people come over, and all kinds of activities. And then we also soon afterwards took it down and then moved it to Boston City Hall, where it, in collaboration with the mayor's Housing Innovation Lab, we also held events and discussions with community members, community leaders, policymakers, to talk about accessory dwelling unit policy and how it might be introduced to different areas, whether or not it's something that would be desirable or not, and then collecting these comments actually within the space itself, and again also sharing some of these new approaches with people in the community. And now the plug-in house is it's a separate company that we spun off from our office. We've partnered with a manufacturer in the U.S. and recently just got our first building permit to build these in the U.S. We're going to start this in Austin, Texas, where they have a policy that's very favorable to these accessory dwelling units. So I think this is an example of us working with policymakers at a high level, but then connecting with the community, people on the ground, to deal with this housing shortage that we have in cities where really people are not able to have access to desirable areas of the city, right? And people not having access to affordable housing. And so smaller houses just sort of naturally would be less expensive, right? And also on top of that, with our prefabricated technology, the overall costs would come down. And then this last section of the talk, I'll be shifting to a different area of work that we have. In this case, it's education, but I think the approach is similar, right? For us, the design process itself is often full of uncertainty, and one thing that we realized when we started designing schools was that we had all kinds of ideas of how space can improve education, how it can affect the experience of students in schools. But these were all theories when we weren't sure how in reality these ideas would pan out. So what we did is we started designing these small units that we call plug-in learning lofts. We designed these as a kind of a flexible system that you can rearrange and attach things to and adjust. And then we took these and we put them into schools, and we worked together with educators and researchers, and had kids use them, had teachers use them and try them out. And then we would then, together with these, with researchers and educators, document and observe how kids would interact with each other and interact with the environment. Essentially, how space affects their education and their behavior. And we did this not only in the US, but we also did this also in different places in China. and also different kinds of schools. So this is a school in a rural area of China where kids are disadvantaged. So we didn't do this only in schools in big cities. And also we've used this in some of our exhibitions of our work, and held workshops and events where, again, we invited kids to interact with these projects. And also, I think for our exhibitions, they're not done in a way where they're meant to kind of sit there and you look at them from a distance, but it's open for people to interact with and use. And we didn't have any signs explaining how you should use them or anything like that, but people would just come and they understand what they could do, or they invent, or they discover something that we didn't think of ourselves. Yeah, this is another example of that. And actually, on a side, when COVID started, I myself realized I needed some extra space, so I kind of hacked together a loft myself to help us manage our household. These are my 3 kids up there, and one of the insights that we found from doing these lofts and these activities was that just by creating this smaller space on a scale that is closer to kid size, and also elevated in a location that is at the same height as adults, but separate spatially, makes it something that they feel is their own, right? So that kind of sense of ownership is really important. Also, you have a space that's also a little bit separated, right? Like the adult is not in the same space. That these things are all really important to giving kids a sense of agency. Also related to COVID, when it first began, I know a lot of people saw that in the news. They made a big deal about this hospital in Wuhan that was built in a week or something like that. It was a prefab modular hospital. And actually, at the same time, we were building schools using the same approach. So it was kind of nice to get that, for there to be so much interest in prefabrication. And so this is a school that we built also in Shenzhen using this sort of modular system. And then this is a school that's we built more recently. That's a larger size, also in Shenzhen. So these were done very quickly, and not only were they built quickly, they were also occupied really quickly. And also in Shenzhen, it's one of these cities that are growing really quickly. So because that increase in population, you really don't have enough schools to serve this population, and you also don't have space, right? So again, here we're acting, our buildings are more like interventions in an existing context. It's not a tabula rasa situation, and we're doing this quickly and flexibly. In this case, it's a different kind of activation, I suppose, but yeah, basically bringing educational facilities to places that really need them. And I'm going to end with a very recent project that we just won. This is a school. It's a larger scale, and I wanted to show kind of an example of how we could be, how we incorporate our approach from a lot of these other projects that I've showed into a building that is more larger in scale, and I guess more typical. The idea behind this project really started with the park that's to the north of this, to the on the top of this image here. That's this very large park, and the idea was to pull in that landscape into the site, into the school itself. So we call this a learning landscape that we've brought into our site and closer to these, the rest of the city. And also the building itself, the space. So the building itself is not flexible in the sense that you would move spaces around and so on. But I think we've incorporated the idea of flexibility in this notion of this learning landscape, and so that the spaces are not defined so much by walls and floors, but rather a flowing space that connects different levels of the school together, particularly in these courtyard areas. And also you can see where we do have walls, those walls are walls that can open up, and we have, you can see lab areas that can use, take advantage of the outdoor areas here, the cafeteria area here where you could have seating that's also outside. The climate in Shenzhen is very favorable to using space this way. And that also, learning from the experience of COVID is that to be learning outdoors and to be using outdoor space is actually not only conducive to preventing the transmission of diseases, but also it's beneficial to the learning process itself, right? To have nature near you, imagine having learning about plants and actually having the plants next to you, or doing experiments outside where you don't have to be worried about having a drainage for water and so on. So yeah, we really try to bring in learning activities, all kinds of different types of learning activities together and to create a flow between all the different types of spaces. Even in the library interior, we use this kind of terracing, right? So that you have individual spaces like you saw sort of in our learning loft, but then you also have a larger unified space. Yeah, and even with the design of the classrooms, we designed windows that can open up, that would allow people to, teachers to use kind of like a table surface area where you could have a connection to the outside and have a class sort of straddling between places, and you can have things that would be, you could do things that where you wouldn't have to worry about cleaning up so much, right? Like plants and messy activities, activities that we think also are more conducive to education because you're more hands-on, right? Just like the way that we try to practice architecture. Yeah, and so this is the last image of the project, and that concludes my talk.
Thank you so much for this really interesting lecture. I think you covered such a range of projects. It was amazing to hear your different approaches to all of them and how you really kind of go individually about approaching every client. We have lots of questions in the chat box.
Great.
Okay. I'll see if people would like to come live and ask them, or if not, I will read them. First question is from Tanya. Would you like to come live and ask it?
I just wanted to ask, what kinds of materials did you find to be useful when you were kind of developing the whole plugin idea, especially because you're designing for small spaces? So in terms of an easy construction process, what kind of materials did you find to be useful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, as you said, we had a lot of tight space, so it was important to really understand the context, right? So I think that's one thing that oftentimes people neglect, and so we were actually in a great situation to do that because we could talk to people face to face, and we had experience just being there. And the spaces it was very limiting. For one, we didn't want to tear anything down, we didn't want to disrupt anything, we didn't want to move people out. there are all these narrow alleyways, right? So you can't bring in a big truck, or you definitely can't bring in a crane, right? And we're building these inside of the house, right? So, you know, one important thing about construction is that you need space around you to do things, right? So in this case, you're actually building the house from the inside. You're not, you know, you can't put up scaffolding around it, right? It had to be something that you could do with ladders and yeah, just kind of basic tools. So we looked at all kinds of prefab approaches, didn't find anything out there existing that was sufficient. And what we ended up with was a panelized system. So it's a certain category of prefab. But yeah, these are panels, and they're these kind of sandwich panels that integrate insulation, wiring, the exterior interior surfaces into one panel. And we actually had to develop it ourselves. You know, so we found something that was close, and then worked with a manufacturer to adapt it to the use of building construction. I also have a background in product design, you know, so I think in terms of materials and processes and manufacturing, that's a background that I do have. But I think it's also something that architects don't often have so much opportunity to interact with and understand. You know, most architecture is really about choosing things that you're organizing, bringing together, right? I mean, you can look at so many of the buildings in the U.S. I mean, you have buildings of all kinds of sizes, different shapes, different forms, different uses, but they all use the same construction approach, and that is wood framing. And actually, wood framing has lots of benefits, but there are also a lot of drawbacks. And I think part of the cost of housing in the U.S., why it's so expensive, is partially due to wood framing. I mean, the materials are inexpensive, but the construction process is very expensive. It requires a lot of labor, and there's a lot of waste involved. So those are some of the considerations that we had. That's kind of, you know, those are some of the issues that we had to grapple with in choosing the right approach. And I think it's interesting that this approach, now we're using it in other places, right? We're trying to introduce this housing to the U.S. And I think because we went into such detail in China, we were able to test this out directly with you know, very intimately with the people that we're building for. I think we're able to gain insights that are then transferable to other places, right? So I think oftentimes we worry that, oh, if you're being so specific to this place, to this site, to this client, that, you know, what you learned is not transferable. And actually, I think the opposite. I think that if you don't get deep enough, detailed enough, that you run the risk of actually not being able to solve real problems, to gain real insights. Yeah. So yeah, that's a long answer to the question.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting. I also wanted to ask, I missed like a bit of the first a bit of lecture, but I saw like one of the images you showed, it was in Guangzhou, right? That's where I grew up. So I was just wondering if that's where you guys like started the plugins, or?
Actually, we started the plugins in Beijing, so where our offices, but a lot of these schools, a lot of our work actually, and some of the plugins are in Guangzhou, in that area, because, well, they're actually more open to new ideas. The climate is also conducive to say, like the school that I just showed. I'm actually, my family's from Guangzhou. I was born in the U.S., but yeah, I have a closeness to that. And yeah, so there's something, and also, you know, those people's canopies. That's really popular in the south, in Guangzhou, and the surrounding area. Yeah, so a lot of the kind of street life that inspires us, the kind of flexibility of, you know, how people, you know, in how people use space, just go about their daily life. I think is very much we're very much inspired by how people are there in the area.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Josephine. Would you like to come and ask your question?
Yes, hi. I was just kind of wondering, with the plug-in houses, how integral to the design process was the kind of consideration of how long they'd last and the kind of sustainable aspects?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting when people think of, so we don't really have a word for this kind of building, right? Like you think of a building that you can take down or put up quickly as something that's temporary. And you can say that temporary structures require that you can put up and take it down quickly, right? But that doesn't say that doesn't mean that permanent structures should be able to be put up quickly and also be taken down if you needed to, right? So it's not to say that the building is temporary in quality, but that it offers that flexibility, right? So, so for the plug-in house, in fact, there's some uses that other buildings couldn't provide. So, for example, you could actually take down a couple of the panels and then add a whole other room very, very easily, right? Without changing most of the structure, without cutting into the wall even, right? Some of these people will have as I said before, have a real sense of uncertainty in terms of how, to their tenure in these places, how long they can live there, how long they can stay in these places. And so the idea that they can actually take their house with them is something that was really attractive. When you talk about property and ownership of property and land, owning property usually, well, oftentimes people think of owning property as also owning land. Now in China, there's no such thing as private ownership of land, right? So actually, what you own is the building, right? But in reality, it's kind of the same, right? Because if you're kicked off your land, you lose your house. But in this case, that's not so. You own the house, you don't own the land. If you had to move, you could use it again or use parts of it. So I think I guess I'm offering different notions of lifespan and longevity. But the quick answer is the quality of the panels are very high. There's no there's no risk of it not being able to endure the lifespan of a house, and actually it would be able to endure a longer life than what you have there, or even modern buildings today, partially because it's manufactured in a factory. So if you just think of the things around you, like you think of, I don't know, your computer or your bike or something like that. If you were to have something that was built by hand, actually it would be hard to reach the kind of quality that you could reach in a manufacturing facility. I mean, that's just how it is. These automated processes allow you to do that. I mean, you could never make your own Apple product. Like it's kind of impossible, or it'd be just even more expensive, incredibly expensive. So mass production really allows us to be able to reach a certain quality. In terms of sustainability, energy efficiency, and so on, it's a similar reason, because this is manufactured in a factory. It's the material itself. Most of the material is actually insulation, so that's foam, polyurethane. And so these panels they're not even hand built. They're injected into a mold, and so the consistency of that foam is extremely high. So most buildings will use batt insulation, all kinds of like the fluffy stuff that you put into the cavity of a wall. So that's the lowest quality of insulation. On top of that, you would have rigid insulation, different types of foams, EPS, XPS. Ours is the highest quality of foam insulation, polyurethane. The cells are very small. It's not permeable to water, and it's actually, in our case, it's structural. You know, the foam itself is not there just to kind of keep you warm. It's there to hold the building up, and it's able to be structural because it's a sandwich panel. So you can think of like foam core, right? Foam itself is really weak, just like paper in cardboard is really weak. But because we've sandwiched it, just like foam core with the paper, it builds up a lot of rigidity to the point where you can use it as structure, right? And you can think about it. I mean, a wall where you can actually get rid of most of the structure, right, and actually use the foam itself. That is something that you have to have anyway, as the structure. So yeah, and there are many levels of efficiency that you see here. So in efficiency of materials, in energy efficiency, it's, you know, very high R rating for the insulation, so on and so forth. And also the shipping, it's, you know, because it could be flat packed like IKEA furniture, it's flat packed, you know, you're not bringing a big, huge house. You know, people love to show these craning in, you know, large modules, and it looks cool because it's kind of, you know, like a Lego type thing, but it's also not efficient, you know, because you're actually shipping empty space. So you would never do that with a product, or if you can help yourself, right? So flat packed is really important for that. Yeah, so anyway, lots of aspects to that.
Thank you. That was lots of food for thought. That's
sure.
Hey, Tay, would you like to come and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So from a practitioner's perspective, can you kind of give us like a sense of how the process of like brief to completion of a project is in China, and whether it differs from other countries from your experience? And also, it's like, how is the market in China evolving in terms of architecture?
I'm sorry, the first part of your question, you said something about completion, a degree of completion, or
just like, what is the process of like starting a project, and then like what licenses, or how does a project come about, and how does it develop into like the end product?
Well, the problem with my office is a lot of our projects are not so standard, you know. So I don't know if what I would say would be a good way of answering your question. You know, I guess one way to answer this is, I mean, how projects come about. I mean, I can kind of approach this question from someone sort of trying to start, you know, going back 10 years when we started, you know, the mindset of someone trying to start an office and get projects, you know, like it's really, you know, again, a state of extreme uncertainty, right? You don't have confidence, you don't understand how things work, and so on. But I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, I think we just continue to pursue our interests, and we put ourselves out there. You know, I started the office with 2 other partners, Dongfeng and Hojo, so I think that was really important. That wasn't just me myself. Put ourselves out there doing exhibitions, and you know, actually doing work that actually wasn't even commissioned. You know, some of our earlier stuff, these installations and things like that, things that we just kind of did because we wanted to, with very, very few resources. And so because we had very few resources, we just kind of used what was around us, right? You can see that we adapted a lot of things that just were not expensive. And also using projects in many different places gave us a chance to develop it over time, and take advantage of experience that we had from previous projects, right? Like our People's Canopy, actually, the first ones we did in the UK weren't working correctly. Like I got onto finally we built it, I got the first one up there, and I'm like cycling, like, oh shoot, it's starting to tilt, like it's about to fall over. I'm like, what's going on? And then I started trying it backwards. I'm like, oh, so backwards works. So then if you've seen the videos, everyone's cycling it backwards. which isn't typically how we'd want to do it. And it has to do with some of the very subtle aspects of how you design a cycle, how your weight is tilted and things like that. And so the version that we did in Leuven, Belgium, you could cycle forward. So anyways, the issue is that we're able to develop these ideas over time, which I think a lot of architects don't always have that sort of mindset, right? And our plugins definitely did develop over time. You saw that they were inside and then outside and then independent and so on. So I guess that's one aspect, I guess. And then I think, you know, I've kind of gotten over the issue of clients not liking our work. You know, I mean, what I'm showing you is mostly built stuff. I mean, the amount of unbuilt stuff, the amount of ideas that we've had is, you know, just a little depressing, right? And I guess I suggest that you just stick to your guns and you chase your interests. You know, I mean, the series of the topic of this series of talks I understand is, you know, architecture, its relationship with society, how we impact society, and you know, that's what drove our interests. That's why we called ourselves People's Architecture Office. You know, people didn't really talk about architecture really in that way, especially in China. And it was our interest. And so I think chasing that has allowed us to get to this point. You know, I don't know if that's it's a good way of answering your question. You know, in China, I mean, it's also very different from other places. You know, things like that People's the People's Station that was built in a parking lot, but it's a permanent building. You know, it started off as a commission for an installation. They wanted a small installation, and after kind of talking to them, we're like, well, what about this? And then they kind of liked it, and so then decided to build a building, and then found a way to kind of get it through the authorities. And you know, it's this kind of fluid process. So I think if we can keep our minds more open, we actually have more ability to affect things. You know, to really for our work to have greater meaning. If we really accept the status quo and do things as you're expected to do, you know, then you're really restricting yourselves. So yeah, but it's very, very difficult, you know. But that's how we've approached things. I can't say that's the right way, but
Thank you. That really is a lot of like good, valuable information.
Great, I hope so. I tried.
Okay, we have 2 more questions in the chat box. I hope that's okay.
That's okay.
So the next one is from Anne-Marie. Would you like to come and ask a question?
Hello, I'll just start by saying thank you for the talk. It was really interesting to hear about what you've been doing.
Thanks.
I just wanted to ask, like the projects you've shown us, they cover a lot of scales. So anywhere from like the small interactive things that you make for the children to the school that you're showing us. How do you think that this kind of massive variance in scale like informs your architectural thinking?
Yeah, you know, actually, there's a project I didn't show that was an early project of ours. That's a residential project, and they're actually residential towers. And there's I think like 13 towers, each one, over 100 meters tall. So massive in scale, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is, for us that we've tried to keep in mind is that regardless of the scale, our focus is on designing spaces for people. So scale is a really difficult thing because, you know, the funny thing about a project, even like a little house for Mrs. Fan, the amount of time you're spending on actually designing it is not so different from designing the 13 towers. You know, that's a sad thing, you know, because you know, you're charged for your time, right? And you only have so much time, and you have to look at the value of that time, right? So the value in terms of capital for that time for a project of large scale really drives architects to do very large projects, right? But in that time, you're also not able to get into, it's difficult to get into a lot of those kind of subtleties in smaller scale. I think for us, what we try to do is to have that, because we have that range, we have some projects where we can get in that skill and we can learn from that. And then we can then transfer that experience to larger scale projects. You just can't do it within one project. Yeah. And another thing about scale is, while you can compare, a school like this to the plugin or to the housing project that I just mentioned, but then for the plugins, there's the potential of scale even that's much greater than the residential project. I mean, there are 13 towers, many families living in that, in that place. But architecture is limited to a place, to a site. It's one project. Whereas the plugins, the opportunity is to be able to scale in the way, in the sense of a product, right? To reaching scale in those terms, right? To manufacture at a scale, and to be able to go to lots of different cities, lots of different places, hopefully to add housing, in very expensive locations where you really need it. So that's a different kind of scale, right? And there's also the scale of impact. I mean, I could do a very large project, maybe a very large museum that looks amazing, and I'd like to do a project like that. But then you can also have impact on other scales, right? And to have an impact on a community is, and to have an example that then affects maybe not so much your own office, but it could affect other offices, right? Inspiring people to do things. So I think that's also a really important way of thinking about scale. And some of the influences on us, like I think of, so I did spend a year in London. I was at the Bartlett as this kind of study abroad. And so certainly, the work of, at the time, Peter Cook was the head of the school. And, you can see sort of aspects of archigram, and also that period from the 60s and 70s, the metabolists and things like that, sort of in aspects of our work. But you also know that a lot of these projects were not built. They're paper projects, right? They're theoretical, but also having incredible impact. So I think we can do it in lots of different ways. But for me, it really is to just keep in mind that really the point of all of this is hopefully is for us is to bring us closer to people, bring people closer to each other. Ensure that we have a diverse, that we keep our communities diverse, and that architecture has a very, very direct impact on this. It's used as a way of separating people and segregating societies. So why can you not use it to do the opposite, right?
That's really helpful. Thank you. Really insightful.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, and we have one more question for Aidana. Would you like to come live and ask it? And also, if anyone else has any last questions, please drop it in the chat box.
Hello. Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for your talk. I am incredibly taken aback by the range that you have as a studio, and it's an incredible achievement. And especially, I was just, I have a personal interest in like B Corp and the social values of architects, like attitude, especially towards the future, and championing that. And I congratulate you for being certified. It's a very great achievement. I'd like to ask, especially very like currently and with the issues that are faced with architects nowadays, social value and like the architect's values sometimes being challenged in the sense of the societal responsibility to the climate and the climate emergency. Could I ask, within studios, sorry, your studio, would there be like a reaction that you feel that you've adopted, or anything that you could share with us that is your in current discussion?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, in regards of the climate crisis, one thing is to have a perspective from China. Living there, you're confronted with incredible pollution, right? Mass is nothing new to people living in Beijing and in most parts of many places in China. You're confronted with concern for the food you eat, not just the air that you breathe, because the industrial processes affect the food chain. I mean, some people think that COVID came about because diseases more diseases are transferring from wildlife to humans because we're encroaching into wildlife areas, I guess, right? And that has to do with the growth of cities and expansion and not protecting the natural environment. And also in a lot of our projects, we've worked very closely with manufacturers. So we go to these places. You can see the kind of, we can see a really important part of this global supply chain. Things that are going to, the wealthy countries, the working conditions, the pollution, and the effect on the environment from consumption, right? The global economy. So I think having that perspective is really important. Having firsthand look at this, I think, is really, really important, because it roots us to these issues. So I mentioned some of these kind of paper projects from the 60s and such, right? Some of these are very utopian projects and social at its core. So that is important for us, but we make sure that we're rooted in society, right? That we're not only just floating above. And our approach to deal with this, some parts of, one way is to just bring a greater understanding to these issues. So we'll do that in some of our exhibitions and installations and things like that, and try to incorporate some of the ideas into our projects. We've done one installation I really liked was we collected waste from different cities around China and then just brought them together into this project called Stuff Wall at K11 in Hong Kong. And the installation itself looked really beautiful, right? Because all these different colors and things like that, but it was actually all trash. And we basically went in, took a bunch of this stuff, moved it to this gallery for this exhibition, and we basically just kind of paused its life from going into the trash bin, right? But in the middle of that, we then wanted to bring attention to just this larger system. But anyway, going back to our practice, I think one thing is to not focus too much on those things that are those ideas that are popular, like green architecture, right? I mean, I'm not against green architecture. I mean, we have the school with a green roof, and we're not doing it just to do it. And we're serious about this green roof, and there are all kinds of environmental concerns that we've dealt with in this project. But honestly, a few sort of green but very expensive buildings using very expensive technology is going to have limited impact. I mean, it can inspire more and more of this kind of work, and that's great. But you have a few expensive buildings and a few rich countries, and that's not going to make a dent in anything. Now, really, you have to really look at the large scale, right? So I think if we can find ways of ensuring the cities don't expand at such a rate that they expand vertically, you know, they're denser, that we're making more efficient use of space. Also, there's a great societal impact is that, you know, you bring people closer together. I think we compare religion. You know, like I said, I grew up in LA. I didn't just grow up in LA. I grew up in the suburbs of LA, right? So this place where, I mean, you just don't see your neighbors. You know, you're driving all the time. You know, it's a wasteful kind of lifestyle, and it's also you know, it's very alienating, this kind of lifestyle, you know. So I think we, you know, I think in the talking about things from a larger scale, I think all of our projects really try to focus on bringing people closer together, living closer together, density. And also, I think one aspect that's really important is that we're acting in places that are you know, existing, communities that are existing, resources, services, and, you know, things that are, you know, places where that's already there, and trying to bring people closer to these places, right? So that's different from a lot of development that really looks for inexpensive land, place that's easy to develop. You know, you have to deal with people that are already living there, and kind of build new, you know, new suburbs, new cities, new developments, that kind of thing. We're particularly attracted to those projects that are challenging in that, you know, they're trying to build up in an existing place. Yeah, you know, this is not how a lot of people might talk about sustainability, but sustainability is not about the environment, it's actually about people, right? It's us that's causing the problems, our behavior, our consumption. It's not, you know, I mean, you can use technology to kind of dampen that and so on and so forth, but it's really, I think it's actually more basic than that. I did want to touch on your mention of B Corps. A bit of a bit of a caution with a lot of that rhetoric. You know, we're B Corp, and we've kind of looked into the whole this whole culture around this whole discussion around social entrepreneurship, social enterprises, and just to be careful with it, right? I think this comes from a lot of this kind of .coms or, you know, startup world. And a lot of it is you see a lot of it in China, you see a lot of it in the US. And it's good, you know, I think it's important that we are entrepreneurial and you take risks. But to also, again, to be grounded in our ambitions and optimism. You know, it's important to be optimistic, to think that you can affect things. But in a lot of the rhetoric, you don't hear the flip side. You know, you don't hear, it's a lot of times there's a simplification of issues in society, you know, like these very deep issues, like in the US, particularly around race, recently, of course. To be optimistic, but to not oversimplify, and to embrace those complexities and to really get into it. Yeah. So I'm conflicted about a lot of the social entrepreneurial stuff. You know, I get there's, you know, as architects, it's difficult not to be disillusioned in many ways. You know, but I think it's healthy to have that, but then at the same time to be more optimistic than that. Yeah. So I hope that you can see in our work that we're definitely a practice with strong optimism, but that we have a way of rooting ourselves, grounding ourselves through just kind of how we, you know, through our perspective, how we observe things and try to work with people and incorporating ideas.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated you going in depth with like the approach that it can be from individual to like the general attitude of architects. I think that's very showing and telling of how rounded you think of this, and it's very good to hear. Thank you. I really appreciate as well the way that you were discussing on all topics, especially the B Corp part and the oversimplification kind of that might happen. And I think that's a great point as well for the others in the meeting to just sometimes think about when it's applied, especially in large and many formats that can be in your studio. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
I think that was
You're welcome.
If anyone else have any, please jump in and ask. I'll just wait a second if anyone. Okay. Oh, if not, thank you so much for the lecture again and coming and agreeing to speak to us. And I think the last question was kind of a really nice finish to all that, and the fact that you really shared your optimism of your company with us, which I'm personally very grateful for. So again, thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone for the discussion and coming today. It's lovely to have you here.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this, and please do this more with more people. Yeah. And
thank you. Very nice.
Good luck. Looking forward. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Lots of thank yous coming in the chat box.
Sure.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.